In 1692, the town of Salem was gripped by fear. Fear of the unknown, fear of God's punishment, fear of anything that did not fit neatly into the rigid world the Puritans believed they were building. History would later remember Salem as a place of hysteria, of false accusations, of neighbors turning against neighbors. But what history often forgets is that not everyone in Salem was seen as equal even before the trials began. Some lives were more vulnerable than others long before the first accusation was spoken aloud. Among the people living on the edges of Salem society were Black women. Some were enslaved, some were free but deeply restricted. All were watched. All were judged, and all existed in a world where their presence alone could be interpreted as a threat. In a community obsessed with purity and control, Black women represented everything the Puritan leadership feared and refused to understand. Puritan society was built on strict rules. Women were expected to be silent, obedient, and submissive. Their bodies, voices, and thoughts were tightly controlled. Black women existed outside even those limited protections. They were not seen as fragile or worthy of protection. They were seen as bodies for labor, as outsiders, as people closer to sin than salvation. Their pain was normal. Their suffering was invisible. When strange illnesses and unexplained behavior began to appear among young girls in Salem, the town searched desperately for answers. They did not look to medicine. They did not look inward. They looked for someone to blame. And they looked first at those who were already feared. One of the first accused was Tituba, an enslaved Black woman owned by Reverend Samuel Parris. Tituba lived at the center of the household where the accusations began. She was different. She spoke differently. She came from a culture the Puritans did not understand. That was enough. Under pressure, isolation, and violence, Tituba confessed, not because she was guilty, but because confession was the only way to survive. Her confession shaped everything that followed. She described stories the Puritans wanted to hear: dark forces, animals, shadows, and the devil himself. Her words confirmed their worst fears, and once those fears were confirmed, the machinery of accusation could not be stopped. But Tituba was not alone. Other Black women, enslaved and free, lived under constant suspicion. Even without formal accusations, they were monitored, whispered about, and blamed for misfortune. If a child fell ill, if crops failed, if livestock died, blame could quietly settle on those who had no power to defend themselves. The trials that followed were not only about witchcraft, they were about control. They were about reinforcing social hierarchies. They were about deciding who belonged and who did not. White women could sometimes rely on family names or community standing. Black women had no such shield. Unlike many of the white accused, Black women were rarely executed during the trials, not because they were believed to be innocent, but because they were considered property. Enslaved people were valuable. Killing them meant economic loss. Survival, in this case, did not mean justice. It meant continued bondage, continued silence, continued fear. When the hysteria finally collapsed, Salem attempted to forget. The trials were later acknowledged as a mistake. Apologies were issued, reputations restored. But those gestures did not extend equally to everyone. The suffering of Black women remained largely unrecorded. Their trauma was not written into official apologies. Their names were not preserved in memorials. History moved on. Salem became a symbol, a warning, but the story it told was incomplete. The voices of Black women, those who endured suspicion without trial, punishment without recognition, survival without freedom, were left behind. What happened in Salem was not an accident. It was the result of fear combined with power, and in that equation, Black women bore a weight history still struggles to acknowledge. They lived in a world where being visible meant danger, and being invisible meant erasure. Their story reminds us that history is not only shaped by those who speak the loudest, but also by those who were never allowed to speak at all. And if we listen closely, even centuries later, the silence still tells us everything we need to know.